It's been a couple of months since our trip to Normandy with Joe. Going on that trip and making this presentation, I must admit, has been very rewarding to me personally in many ways. This journey took me to a different country where I made some new friends, which was nice, but the greatest thing that I gained from this trip was a great sense of pride and reverence for those men who risked and gave their lives for this thing that we sometimes take for granted, freedom. And don't get me wrong, I respected our World War II veterans before. I know the history of what happened there, but when you walk that still scarred earth of Pointe du Hoc, or you touch the sands of Utah and Omaha Beach, and walk those hallowed grounds of Normandy American Cemetery, and watch as people go out of their way again and again to thank a veteran like Joe for his part in that great war, it's really hard to understand the sacrifices that they made, and it makes those sacrifices very real and very tangible. This trip has left on all of us an unforgettable impression. So, from Dan, Jim, Darren, and I, we'd like to offer Joe and to all of our veterans a humble and sincere, heartfelt thank you. Now, let's get on with the program. We began our journey on Sunday, May 22nd, meeting up at the Charlotte Douglas Airport, USO. We were there for a few hours, which allowed Joe to meet with some other active military and other veterans, where they shared some stories and snacks. And I will say, if you ever get stuck in the airport, this is the place to be. It was outfitted pretty well, and they treated us very well there. So we left at about 6:40 p.m. that evening, and the overnight flight was thankfully uneventful, and we arrived in Paris, France around 8:30 a.m. the next day, Monday. This is where we met Patrick, our personal tour guide, for the first time, and he helped us make our way over to the hotel. Now, we flew overnight, but we still needed a little sleep because the plane was very difficult to sleep on. So we all needed a little nap to catch up on sleep, and decided we would meet up later that evening for dinner at the hotel. We started out at our hotel by eating a pretty hearty breakfast, and then we met our driver Max for the first time that morning. Max drove us by van to Normandy from Paris through the picturesque French countryside, as our tour guide Patrick called it, the long scenic way along the Seine River and the Seine River Valley. Patrick did pick that route for us, and it was a good option that he had set up for us, and it allowed us to have a few interesting stops on the way. Our first stop was at the Cave Church of the Annunciation, which was a small church and a cemetery located on Haute Isle. This is a medieval church that was carved right into the limestone cliff of a mountain overlooking the Seine Valley. The church was carved into the white chalk cliff in around 1670 to 1673. Only the small square bell tower emerges from the grassy soil over the cliff now, but you could see into the church and could tell that it was quite large inside. We did spend a little bit of time there admiring the architecture and looking at the ancient gravesite that was there. This place is called La Roche-Guyon, and it was built in the 12th century, and it controls a river crossing of the Seine. And after D-Day, this particular castle was used by German Field Marshal Rommel as his headquarters, where he defended Normandy against the Allies from a bunker located here. The long scenic way allowed us to stop and stretch our legs at Claude Monet's house and gardens at Giverny. Some of Monet's most famous paintings were of his garden here and some of the rooms inside of his house. And we had a nice little walk and look around, and were able to stop for some snacks at a local cafe and had a nice little time there. We were able to stop and look and see where the United Kingdom and Canadian landing forces came to shore on D-Day during Operation Overlord. We were also able to walk around here, see some of the 88 millimeter artillery guns and some of the other World War II antiques that they've preserved in this town. We did walk around a little bit more, had a light lunch here, and made our way on to our next stop. On the way to Utah Beach, we were able to stop at a location that our tour guide Patrick recommended. And this is where we got to see some of the artillery locations and bunkers where the Germans were occupying and firing artillery shells at the American troops during D-Day. This location did allow Joe to also meet a few of the local people there and some of the other tourists who all wanted to hear what he had to say and did want to shake his hand and tell him thank you for his service to their country. On our way to Normandy, we were able to stop at St. Mary-Glise, which is famous for its D-Day battle. Here, a well-known incident happened involving a paratrooper that was parachuting into the town. His name was John Steele, and he's of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. His parachute caught on the spire of the town church, and he could only observe the fighting going on below, and he had to hang there for 2 hours pretending to be dead so no one would shoot him. But he did eventually get taken prisoner by the Germans, but later escaped and rejoined his division when the U.S. troops of the 3rd Battalion attacked the village. And the incident, if you've seen the movie The Longest Day, the incident was captured in that movie and portrayed by an actor named Red Buttons. You might be able to tell in some of our pictures, they do have a mannequin hanging from a parachute from the spire still to this day to represent that famous battle and this well-known incident. We were able to walk around for a bit and were able to go inside the church and take a few pictures, which was very neat. We finally made it to Utah Beach. This is the site where on June 6, 1944, D-Day, Joe Houser drove into enemy-occupied Normandy by driving a large truck off of landing ship number 266. Joe walked us over to approximately where he came ashore, and then he recalled to us the events of that day. So we stopped for a moment and let him take a sample of sand from that spot as a memento.
This truck I drove off here on Utah Beach, number 266, and I had a pulling a trailer and a gun, 90 millimeter.
Now, Utah Beach is where the 4th Infantry Division landed over 21,000 troops that day. Utah Beach was an important area to capture since it was key to capturing the city of Cherbourg and the deep water ports that were available there. During our stop at Utah Beach, Joe was wearing his World War II hat, which caught a lot of people's attention. Several people wanted to thank him for his service to their country, so we met several people who wanted to talk with Joe and toured the Utah Beach Memorial Museum, where we found a memorial monument there that showed Joe's landing craft, the LST number 266, documented on it. After the museum, we stopped at a cafe beside the gift shop for coffee and for some sodas. The cafe had a bunch of signatures on the walls of all the veterans that had visited in recent years, and it went back for at least a decade. It was about the earliest one I'd seen. And the manager of that cafe was very excited to see Joe and asked if he would do them the honor of signing their wall and writing a little message, which Joe did oblige. Now, they don't see true World War II vets as often as they used to, as they're becoming more scarce these days, so this was a treat for them as well. After this long visit to Utah Beach, We called it a day and took a short drive to Cherbourg, where we checked into our hotel. And then we had some dinner and retired for the evening. On day 4, Wednesday, May 25th, we explored the area around the town of Cherbourg, finding some of the places that Joe remembered. And then later that day, at Joe's request, we went to a historical site in France called Mont Saint Michel. Joe was really eager to see if we could find the site where his truck was hit by artillery. Based on his detailed description, Patrick, our tour administrator, thought he had a pretty good idea of where he thought that this place might be. Joe described the place as coming out of Cherbourg up a winding road, going up the side of a mountain. It was where his truck was hit by a German 88mm artillery gun near the site of a captured 88 gun. There weren't too many roads that met this description, so we think we were fairly certain we found the spot. On this same road, if you take it to the top of the mountain, there's another historical World War II spot that is actually a medieval castle where the Germans made their last stand to hold the town of Cherbourg. This point was strategically important because it gave the Germans the ability to hit targets in and all around the Cherbourg harbor. But for us, it gave some very scenic views of the town of Cherbourg. After spending a few weeks in the infirmary after the artillery strike, Joe was stationed in the city of Hardinvast in a place nicknamed Little Detroit. Patrick took us to the site where Joe and a team of other GIs built an assembly line for building the trucks, jeeps, and other vehicles that were coming off the ship in crates. We spent a little time walking around the village as Patrick filled us in on what went on in this Little Detroit that the American Army had created. All of the logistics that went into the supply chain for this effort are pretty incredible. They built trucks, jeeps, tanks, and other vehicles from the crates of parts coming off the ships at this location. Joe also spent some time guarding German prisoners here, and he was able to convince them to help out in the assembly lines, aiding the Allied efforts. While in Hardinvast, Joe mentioned that there was a buzz bomb site nearby that he used to visit with some of the other GIs. Buzz bomb is a term that they used back then to name the German V-1 rockets due to the sound that they made when flying through the air. Remarkably, our tour guide Patrick knew of this site, and it's not public, but we were able to head off and see if we could find it and see if anything was still there. Since Patrick knew where this was, we had no issue finding it. We were amazed to find lots of the site was still intact. It's currently a private sheep farm, but Joe could still remember and he could still tell us all about it. When we looked around, we could see that there were 2 of the V-1 rocket ramps still intact, and the buildings used by the Germans to operate the site were still there, being used for farm buildings. Just outside of Hardinvast, we stopped at a medieval castle named WWII Chateau. At this location, there was a World War II memorial concrete pyramid that has been built from sand from Omaha Beach. Encased inside that pyramid were over 2,000 artifacts from D-Day, and the pyramid was purposefully built with loose concrete so that it will dissolve over the years, exposing these artifacts over time for others to enjoy. After Hardinvast, Joe wanted to take a break from World War II and go to Mont Saint Michel. Mont Saint Michel is a medieval French castle that was several hours away and has a lot of historical pride for France. Joe visited this site 70 years ago and wanted us to see it as well. He said we wouldn't be disappointed, so we headed off. Upon arriving at Mont Saint Michel, we saw that Joe was correct. There would be no disappointment here. It's a magnificent landmark and one of the historical prides of the French people. The Mont has been of strategic military importance for over 1,000 years, since the 5th century, and the monastery and the castle were built between the 11th and 16th centuries. The abbey is dedicated to the Archangel St. Michael. You really have to see this place to believe it. I suggest making a day for this if you're ever in France. We spent some time here walking around, looking at the sights and enjoying the architecture of the location. After this, we made our way back to Cherbourg for dinner and retired to our hotel rooms for the rest of the night. Day 5, Thursday, May 26th, was going to be a pretty long day for us. Joe was in uniform for a couple of different ceremonies that we were going to attend. And we were headed to Omaha Beach first and then going to come back to Paris. The two ceremonies that we were participating in were the wreath laying ceremony at the Omaha Beach Normandy American Cemetery, and then under the Arc de Triomphe in Paris for the Eternal Flame ceremony. And Joe being in uniform the entire time, he did get a lot of attention, a lot of very sincere thank yous from people this day, both French and American that were visiting, thanking him for his service to our and their country as well. We began our journey to Omaha Beach by stopping at the Pointe du Hoc to visit the U.S. Army Ranger monument that's located there. And this is important because on D-Day, June 6, 1944, U.S. Army Rangers scaled the 100-foot cliffs and seized the German artillery pieces that could have fired on the American landing troops at Omaha and Utah beaches. And at a high cost of life, they successfully defended against the determined German counterattacks. Also, Joe, being in uniform, he was also a pretty hot attraction there also. Once we arrived at Omaha Beach American Cemetery, we were able to look around and see all of the sites that there were there, and it was pretty striking to see all of the American graves that were there and all the headstones lined up so perfectly and so clean and white. It was a little overwhelming to think about all the men that did not make it home after the attacks on D-Day. We made our way over to one of the monuments at the Omaha Beach American Cemetery, where we did have Joe Houser participate in a wreath-laying ceremony there. And at his side were our other two veterans, Darren Graves and Jim Houser. After that wreath-laying ceremony, lots of people wanted to thank Joe for his service, both French and American alike. It was very touching to see how genuinely appreciative the French people were for the sacrifice that the American GIs made for their country. And just standing amongst all the headstones while they came up to Joe thanking him, it felt like it was their way of thanking the soldiers that made it back and the ones that were still there. After the ceremony, we were able to visit the Omaha Beach Museum that they have erected there. The museum was very well done and had a lot of good history and historical items and photos and information that we could look at. There were some more photo opportunities for Joe here as well, and we did spend a little bit of time here, but we had to get back to Paris for the other ceremony that we were attending later that evening. So we made our way from here and left back for Paris. Once back in Paris, we did make a quick stop at a popular Eiffel Tower photo location, and we were interested in getting some pictures with Joe in uniform with the Eiffel Tower in the background. We made our way over to the Arc de Triomphe and were preparing Joe for the ceremony of the Eternal Flame. The ceremony of the Eternal Flame is a ceremony where every evening at 6:30 at the base of the Arc de Triomphe, the torch that is there that burns for the unknown soldier from World War I is rekindled and veterans laid wreaths decorated with red, white, and blue near the flickering flame. It burns in the darkness to recall the sacrifice of the unknown French soldiers who gave their life during the World Wars. This evening, the Paris police were honoring their fallen police and fallen military. Joe was one of the 3 American veterans participating in this ceremony this evening. Brass marching bands were playing, and several local dignitaries were in attendance for this hour-long ceremony. Joe was honored, and he was saluted by several officials, such as the Paris police chief, and shook many people's hands. Had a really good opportunity to talk to lots of people afterwards. After the Eternal Flame ceremony, we were asked to have a drink at a nearby cafe with Paris Police Commissioner and some of the local American VFW officials. We stopped in, had a few drinks with them, then made our way back to the hotel to have some dinner and rest. Day 6 for us started out with a good breakfast, and then we took our van to the top of Monterey, which is the Paris Art District. Uh, in the early 1900s, artists started convening here to socialize and to sell their work to tourists. So when you see Paris in movies or television shows and you see the street artists, this is the district that they're representing. We stopped in that day, and there were some local street artists painting and selling items. We did look around, buy some souvenirs, and then headed off to our next destination. From Montmartre, we headed over to the Notre Dame Cathedral, and that day there happened to be a very large bread festival happening out front. The air was really full of fresh bread smells, so some of us couldn't resist, and we did go in and buy some for snacks. We mingled in to the line, which I guess is French for cutting in line, to get into the Notre Dame Cathedral. And there we saw some very amazing architecture, lots of artwork, lots of pictures, and it was an amazing experience overall. From there, we went on to the French Military Hospital and Museum, and we saw lots of military artifacts from several wars. This is also where Napoleon's tomb is located. We had some lunch there and then moved on to our next location. The last half of day 6, we traveled by van to Versailles and walked around the Palace of Versailles. And Patrick, our tour guide, filled us in on some of the history, the beheading of Marie Antoinette, the other beheadings in the center of the castle where we were actually standing, and some of the history behind the French Revolution and why Versailles was important during that revolution. The group, all of us, were pretty tired at this point. We'd had a really long week and covered lots of ground. So we called it quits a little early today and got back to our hotels in Paris for a couple hours, break, and nap before our final dinner with Patrick. Later that evening, we did have our final dinner with Patrick, and that marked the end of our guided tour. Meeting Patrick at a nearby cafe for our final dinner was really nice. Patrick presented Joe with a souvenir to commemorate the tour, and then we parted ways with Patrick at that point and bid him au revoir. Day 7, Saturday, May 28th. Today we were truly on our own. We had no tour guide or transportation, so we had to figure out how to get around on our own. And we were wanting to go over to the Eiffel Tower and try to get some tickets and go up in the tower to see the views from there. So what we decided to do was take the Paris Metro, and we were able to figure it out and buy some tickets, hop on the local metro station, and make our way over to the nearest metro station next to the Eiffel Tower. Once we were at the Eiffel Tower, we bought some tickets and waited in line for quite some time actually to get a ride up the diagonal lift or the elevator that took us to the middle of the tower. And we did want to go all the way up, so we got on the next elevator or the vertical lift that took us to the very top of the Eiffel Tower where we spent a little bit of time. Only about 15 minutes at the top, and we took some pictures, and we actually saw two marriage proposals while we were there. Lots of very happy crying ladies around. And then we made our way back to the ground, and we called that a successful mission, that we all made it to the top. So our last day, day 8, Sunday, May 29th, our last day in France and our travel day back to the U.S. We were all very tired at this point and ready to come home. And we had contracted with Max, our driver, to come back early Sunday to pick us up for the last ride over to the airport. And Max had been great the entire trip, a consummate professional the entire time, going over and beyond anything we ever expected from a driver, and made our trip very easy and enjoyable and from getting from one place to the other. So we said goodbye to Max at the airport, got through security, got a little bite to eat, boarded the plane without any incidents, and settled in for the long flight home to North Carolina. Back in North Carolina, our group said our goodbyes and we headed home. And this was the end of our great trip. We talked to Joe a little bit about everything that we had seen. We wanted to make sure that we had done everything that he wanted to do. And I'm very happy to report that Joe told us that we had accomplished everything he'd hoped for and then more on this trip. So we consider that mission accomplished. And Joe, we'd all like to say thank you for your great service to this country and allowing us to experience this incredible adventure with you. And you are truly a hero to all of us. And thank you from the bottom of our hearts.